All right, we're going to get rolling.
They helped create an economy that was completely addicted to cheap money.
You need to buy savings bonds or something. You need to be way, way, way out of this space.
I subscribe to Miss Piggy's rule of money management. Always manage to have more money, you know what I mean?
It wasn't but 2 years ago that everybody was saying China's economy was going to be bigger than that of the United States. It's gone in the exact opposite direction.
So we're going to jump right in.
And we are live with This Week in Mining. I'm your host, Jay Martin, and this is the show where we talk about making money in the mining and the metals market. Today, we're doing a deep dive on the gold sector. And so I brought two brains to help me out because there's so much ground we can cover today. So I'm joined by Bob Moriarty and Shane Williams. Thank you both for coming on today. I'm excited to have this conversation.
It's great to be on, Jay.
So
I'm quite excited because I've talked to Shane at length, but never actually seen him. So I get to see him now.
You got him live. You got him live.
Never actually seen him, so I get to see him.
That's perfect. So this is a live show. So anybody who's tuning in, send us your questions in the live chat. I'll get to them as they come in, but I've got a bundle that I want to jump into. So if we're talking about gold, it's a conversation that can go a ton of different directions, but largely we're talking about fragilities elsewhere. That's what drives people to the gold market. When they're scared of something, they go to the safe haven. And so I want to run through a few topics today where I think we're seeing some fragility, one being the broad equities market, one being the bond market, and then one just being the health of the US dollar and the debt accumulation of the US government. So we'll kind of go in that cycle, but I'm just going to pull on threads as we go here. A lot of people that have watched my show are in the comments right now saying it looks like a return to normal. The market looks super healthy, the equities market, stocks are ripping again, and maybe any fears of a recession or crash have passed us. Now, if you do a shallow dive, you'll see that the market isn't really ripping. It's like 7 companies and really like one leading the pack there. It's crazy consolidation. But Shane, I'll pass it to you right out the gate here. What's your take when you may talk to somebody in the sidewalk who's saying, look, it's a return to normal. The game is back on. Go back into equities. That's the strategy.
Yeah, look, there is a lot of that sentiment out there, Jay. And, you know, I think people are very short-sighted, really. You know, people believe in what they see and, you know, they forget of the lag effect. So if you go back to post-COVID, we had a lot of no inflation. There was a big push of money into the system, and it took a long time for those lag effects to come true. And we're seeing that today in inflation. And it's a bit like that with the economy. The economy looks under at a high macro level, looks rosy, but there are a lot of signs underneath the cover, as you will say. There are a lot of charts coming out there in the stock market. There's 7 unicorns out there underneath the surface. Jobs are beginning to be lost in the US. You know, inflation is rising. Their default levels are beginning to rise. So there is a lot of undercurrents that people that you follow are beginning to see, which tells me that there is something beginning to start. It will take a lag effect before it comes in, but there is the start of a happening beginning to happen towards the US recession. I fully believe that. And over time, as you say, you will see more and more of that.
And when you see a company like NVIDIA hitting a $3.4 trillion valuation, which it wasn't that long ago that we were having a conversation about whether or not Apple would become the world's first $1 trillion company. Things have really taken off, but you could kind of make a claim that on the back of the AI rush, and NVIDIA controls 80% of AI chips, that maybe there's some justification there. Otherwise, it just looks like crazy bubble behavior. Bob, what's your take on that?
You know, it's absolutely a bubble. If you look at the chart of silver from April of 2011, it went parabolic, and it just about touched $50, and then it crashed. That chart showing a parabolic move is always an exceptionally dangerous market. Our stock market today is identical to the stock market of March of 2000. And NVIDIA, frankly, has gone parabolic, and the next move will be down. It won't be up. You cannot support the valuation of the company with normal metrics.
And what do you make of the consolidation? Because any headlines talking about market performance today really only mention NVIDIA, Apple, Microsoft, Tesla. That's really it. That's what the headline is. But then they publish this in the context of market performance when really it's an incredibly small handful of companies. What's your take on that, Bob?
It's smaller than what you said. You said 7, and Shane said 7, and it's not 7, it's 5. This is the most narrow market in history. And every time you have had this situation in the past, you've had a market crash. Now, I see the pieces in place for a major crash sometime in the next 3 to 4 months.
Can you expand on that for me? What are you seeing?
Well, I sent you some information about the 5th largest bank in Japan. Japan just raised interest rates for the first time in 20 years. The 5th largest bank announced they are going to sell $63 billion in government bonds over the next year. And of course, when they do that, all of the other Japanese banks are going to try to front run them. Now, for your listeners to understand, as interest rates go up, the value of bonds goes down. And we've had the fastest increase in interest rates in history. So there have been literally trillions of dollars in damage to American banks, but the Federal Reserve has backstopped them, and they're allowing them to value those declining assets at market, not at market value, at face value, which is nonsense. Now, the Japanese companies cannot do that. The Japanese banks can't do that. So they're going to write the losses off. But we have hundreds of banks in the United States that are hundreds of billions of dollars in losses. And at some point, we have to pay the piper.
So we're always looking for watershed moments, and Japan being the largest foreign owner of U.S. government bonds could be that watershed moment. I feel if they have to sell in large number, it could, maybe I'm sensationalizing, you tell me, could this be the watershed moment that sends a signal to the UK and Luxembourg, everyone else who's holding U.S. government bonds, that you got to get out of this asset sooner than later? Could you imagine something like that?
Yeah, there's 2 watershed moments. If you go back to the peace conference in Switzerland, the EU has agreed to steal $50 billion from Russia to send the money to Ukraine. And quite bluntly, it's insane because, first of all, it's going to destroy the credibility of the United States, because it sends a signal to every other country in the world that anytime the United States wants to steal your assets, they can. Now, that is going to cause countries like China, like Taiwan, like Japan, to look at it and say, well, maybe we shouldn't be so heavy in U.S. treasuries. But then you've got the situation where somebody announces they're going to sell $63 billion. China sold $56 billion in 1 month last month. The United States has made it clear we intend to go to war against China. So China and Russia have unloaded all their U.S. treasuries that they could, and other countries are going to start doing that. Now, Saudi Arabia has just let lapse the agreement with the United States that all oil would be sold in gold. And it's not as big a deal as most people are making. However, There have been lots of reasons the United States has sent signals saying you do not want to own U.S. treasuries. So U.S. treasuries are going to go down, interest rates are going to go up. The stock market is riding on 5 stocks alone. So we have a very, very fragile system. And you have seen a rush into gold, and you've seen a rush into silver, and you're very probably going to see a lot more.
Shane, anything you want to bolt on there? I see you nodding along.
Yeah, look, I would also add more on the macro level around the world. Look, we're seeing a lot of conflict in the world as well. You know, I mean, on a geopolitical perspective, what I agree everything what Bob says, but if you look on also on the geopolitical spectrum, you have 2 wars ongoing in the world. You have, you know, the Ukraine-Russia situation. You have the Israel sort of Gaza with situation. You have a lot of this uncertainty in the US as well, with the US elections coming up and 2 candidates who are, let's just say they're not top rate candidates, I would say, in going forward for the US. So you have a lot of this instability going on. And that also is a worry underneath everything that Bob said. There's also this macro political thing going on. So all those sort of things will come together, I believe, with one watershed moment, and then all of them will kind of fall apart, I think, Jay. So that's very important as well that people keep an eye on. You have China and US posturing as well. So you have a lot of those political things going on, macro political things going on in parallel to everything else. So that creates I don't want to be doom and gloom, but that does create a very worrisome scenario. And gold is also a hedge against all those situations.
Yeah, no, I get that. You know what? I don't see it so much as doom and gloom when we talk about the end of these cycles and the transition of power. I feel like the more you study the cycles of power throughout long-term history, I don't want to say the more apathetic you become, but it just normalizes it, right? And because any narrative around the collapse of words like collapse, the collapse of the US dollar, the crash of the empire, all this stuff, when in reality, power eventually just transitions somewhere else. It always has, it always will. No currencies lasted forever.
Sometimes those transitions can be rather ugly a little bit. As you talk about the British versus the US, it took a couple of world wars. You know, it's not a transition to Spanish, you know, transition over time to Portuguese. You know, it comes with some sort of transition moment. I mean, over time it will happen. But sometimes the worry is what causes that to happen. You know, we had the British was the British Empire. The US came along and took a couple of world wars of that to help. Who knows what it'll take going forward. So I agree. It is something that potentially it will happen and it's a part of life, but it's just a worry about what will cause that transition to happen. That's more the issue is, as we're both fans of Ray Dalio. If you read his book, the Great Transitions, and you know, there is a point in time that causes those transitions to happen.
Yeah. Okay. And you are bang on. Every single one of those transitions happened on the back of a multi-regional, large-scale, long-term war. I think it was a 30 years war where the Spanish passed the torch to the Dutch. It was the 4th Anglo-Dutch War where the Dutch passed to the British, and obviously World War II. And you could make the argument that we are seeing the early stages of some long-term, multi-regional, massively destabilizing conflicts as these hot wars begin to escalate. I want to follow up on, Bob, you mentioned the Saudis not renewing the petrodollar agreement. I was shocked that didn't get more press and more headlines, but maybe I overthought it. Maybe it's not as consequential as I thought it might be. What's your take, Shane? I'll stay with you and then go back to Bob and get your thoughts. Were you surprised by the lack of media coverage? Do you think it's a very consequential event? We look back 10 years, 15 years into the future on this event. Do you think it'll be as, you know, a consequential moment?
Yeah, I was surprised it didn't get as much media attention as it was. But look, like everything, Jade, it's a transition. You know, gold has been, the oil has been translated and worked in dollars for many, many years. And so it's not as if all of a sudden you can go from a dollar sort of currency base for oil to something else. So I think we're seeing that as in bits and pieces. You know, a lot of countries are beginning to trade in their own currencies, you know, China, Russia, etc. beginning to start that process. But I think to go from one extreme to the other will take a long time. So I think it's a pivotal moment, but how quickly that transitions and becomes a reality is something that I think will take a lot longer than people will do, because oil has been traded in dollars for many years. You don't just change straight away.
You know, yeah, it happens on the margin. It took 30 years for the pound sterling to fully transfer to the US dollar as supremacy. Bob, what's your take? Were you surprised the Saudis did not renew the petrodollar? And what do you think of that?
I wasn't surprised at all. And frankly, that's the only situation in which I think the media treated it fairly. Now, I believe that virtually everything important today, the media is lying. We're being lied to about everything. The head of the CIA in 1969 said that his people would know they had succeeded when everything that Americans believed was a lie. The Saudis have been selling in alternative currencies for many months, so all they did is make something official rather than being unofficial. But I'll give an example of something that absolutely should have been on the front page of every newspaper in the world. Are you familiar with what the president of Serbia said a week ago?
No, I'm not. You have to catch me up.
That's interesting. Shane, are you aware?
No, I'm not, Bob. I'm not, Bob. I haven't
Okay,
heard.
let me read a quote to you. Okay, the president of Serbia, and understand Serbia is not part of NATO, however, it's part of the EU, so they should understand what's going on. The president of Serbia recently said, we will have world war within 3 to 4 months, perhaps sooner. Why is that not front page news in every newspaper in the world? There is something credible from a credible source, and nobody says anything about it. Now, Jim Rickards, who is part of the military industrial complex, who has participated in many war games, has pointed out that in every single war game from the United States against Russia or NATO against Russia has gone nuclear. I am exceptionally scared of the potential of a nuclear war very soon. And it makes me very glad I'm old. You guys, on the other hand, have a real problem.
Okay, so a couple things there. Number one, why would a headline like that be buried? It's great, interesting question to ask. My assumption is that because if it was publicized, then, American support for funding Ukraine or funding Israel would probably diminish very quickly. Do you think that's related to why you might bury a headline like that? You got to keep
100%. What we are doing in Gaza is obscene. We are paying for the bombs to kill women and children, and it's sickening. And I sent you some notes about what's going on in Gaza. Shane was talking about 2 wars. There's actually 3 wars. There's the war of Ukraine versus Russia, which NATO started. And you've got the war of Israel against Gaza, but Israel is threatening to attack Lebanon and Hezbollah. And Hezbollah has somewhere between 100,000 and 150,000 missiles and rockets. And should Hezbollah go to war with Israel, it will destroy Israel because Syria and Iran will both get involved. So we could have a nuclear war in Ukraine, and we could certainly have a nuclear war in Israel / Lebanon / Syria / Iran. It's a very dangerous time, and you're going to see a rush into safety, and of course that's gold.
I I don't share Bob's doom and gloom scenario for sure, Jay. But it is definitely starting. You know, I see skirmishes. I see start of that. I'm not as, how would I say, nearsighted as Bob to see it imminent, but I do see there is the potential as we go forward for those sort of skirmishes to exacerbate and get more and more conflict, regional conflict.
So if here, let me try to steelman that a little bit, Bob. So if we look at the way the geopolitical chessboard is shifting, it's shifting in favor of China. I might make that claim, and I would make that claim because we look at a war that no one's talking about, which I'm calling the battle for Africa. Across the Sahel region of Africa, there's been 9 military coups in the last 3 years. All governments that flipped from Western Allied to Eastern Allied, another 6 failed attempts. That continent has been sort of under siege. And now, you know, the Wagner Group, now infamous Wagner Group, has been rebranded as Africa Corp. They're parading around the Sahel region, offering now regime change protection plans to these governments. If you're worried about a military coup, don't worry. We'll take care of you in exchange for access to your natural resources. It's a breadbasket of a continent. Africa is not one thing. There's, you know, obviously many regions and cultures and alliances, but that's a very important continent that has flipped one way. If you look at the first ever deep water port is being built now 50 miles north of Lima in Peru. This is the first ever deep water port on the Pacific side of South America, and it's funded by the Chinese. So this is now a direct route to Asia from South America, which massively changes trade opportunity. But little deals like this have happened in Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, et cetera, et cetera. And again, we're seeing major investment via, you know, 5G, cloud computing, transportation, and energy infrastructure in these countries. The notable part is that China is flipping the board with only 200 soldiers deployed globally, and they're all in Djibouti. So they're doing this with economic strength. And the only reason I bring this up is because isn't it in their best interest to make sure World War III does not happen? Because they've made their moves. They're set to profit, but a world war would massively disrupt their plans. And they've been very intentional with their plans. So maybe, you know, the two superpowers might find some common ground that we've got to get back to business. But what's your take? Either one of you, take that one.
Okay, well, they just had a peace conference in Switzerland, and Russia was not invited. And even the Swiss host came out and said that's kind of a waste of time if you don't actually invite the people who are participants. What we're seeing is a global conflict. It's not just China. It's a global conflict between the debt-based system of the West and the resource-based system of the East. And I would hesitate to point the finger at China, but BRICS in general. Now, about the same time, NATO was holding that so-called peace conference in Switzerland, Russia and China were holding a conference, and there are 30 countries that want to join BRICS. And quite bluntly, I think the debt-based system of the West and the debt-based system is collapsing, and everybody understands it. I am quite impressed with the Chinese foreign minister. I'm quite impressed with the Russian foreign minister. And if people would actually listen to Putin and to Lavrov, they would realize they're the people who want peace. They're not the people who want war. But you've got Finland being aggressive. You got Denmark being aggressive. You got France saying they're going to send troops. You got Poland going to a peace conference and saying what we really need to do is we need to bust Russia up into 200 pieces. Now, NATO is not a peace organization. It is a war organization. If you think NATO is in charge of peace, you should go to Libya and you can buy a slave in the market. So we are in an exceptionally dangerous time. And we've got Biden, who's totally senile, absolutely out of control, has no business being president of the United States. and Trump, and I'm not impressed with either one of them. So the everything's been put in place for a massive fire, and all it's going to take is a match or one stupid second lieutenant, and it could go nuclear. And I agree with Shane. Russia and China do not want a nuclear war, but NATO does.
And I would add a little bit, Jay, there. I'm of your opinion. I think the global superpower war, but people could get dragged in through these skirmishes. I do see that sort of be a way of, dragging in the groups. I agree. I'm not sure we'll have a standoff sort of big nuclear war as that, because there's so much to lose from each of the powers. But I do see these regional and more regional conflicts sucking in the powers, as you said, around the Middle East, and then you have Iran potentially coming in, and then you have the bigger powers. So I do see something like that happening much more. And on as you said, China has been very strategic in its view of how it's going to win this war. America has one view of the defense and the big army, but I actually think China's been much more strategic in it, in winning hearts and minds, as you said, across the world. And I do see that as a strategy that nobody's talking about. Nobody talks about Africa, as you say. Nobody talks about it. Nobody mentions it. All the coups, nobody puts it all together. Nobody brings that bridge together, and that's happening under our noses, effectively, Jay.
Mm. Well, that's what they say. When America comes to visit, we get a lecture. When China comes to visit, we get a port or a bridge.
Yeah.
It's
I do know, actually, interestingly, Jay, I do know that on the the West Coast of the United States and in Hawaii, the US are building they're putting massive infrastructure into Pearl Harbor and all those things to get, along the whole of the West Coast of the United States. They are spending massive amount of dollars to beef up that West Coast, so, and the powers that be, they're getting ready for something large. They're upgrading all the Pearl Harbor, all those big deep water ports and everything. I know that's going on. I've read about that as well. So they know strategically in the distance, they're getting ready for something, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Now getting back to currency for a minute here. One of the most common conversations that I have on this channel is the future of world reserve currency, in a number of angles that we hit this, like, what's the duration that the American dollar has left? I have guests on that think it's as short as a decade. I have guests on that say, look, this is growing pains. The American empire is still in its adolescence. There's another, quite maybe a couple generations to go still. What happens next is the other part of the conversation. Do we go towards just a multipolar world where we transact a few different ways and countries have optionality? Maybe that's what Saudi Arabia is looking for, probably exactly what they're looking for. But take on the future health of the US dollar as maybe not the reserve currency, but the trade currency. Bob, any thoughts that you'd...
Well, I'm glad you said that, because that's a good way to put it. The concern I have is what happens immediately. Every country in history that has had the world's reserve currency had it for about 4 generations, about 80 years. And of course, we've had it for exactly 80 years. So as the world's reserve currency, the dollar is collapsing. However, because it's still the most important instrument, it will be a trade union for a significant time in the future. It'll do the same thing that the British pound did. Okay. My wife was British, and they were still on rations until 1954, but the British pound still had some value. Okay. So I think the US dollar will have value, but clearly many of the countries, in reaction to the sanctions put on by the United States, have started doing trading in their own currencies. And BRICS is absolutely working on some kind of agreed currency. It won't be the world's reserve currency, but they're trying to come up with something. And I agree with Ray Dalio. If you don't understand gold, you don't understand economics. if you don't own gold, okay, you don't understand what's going on. Gold is going to be a part of the financial future, period. The United States has destroyed the value of the dollar, even though it will still trade. Should Japan crash the bond market, the costs of inflation in the United States and Canada is going to go through the roof.
Shane, any follow-up thoughts on that?
I agree, Bob. I do believe that going forward, the US dollar will continue to be that sort of main currency, but over time, the BRICS currencies will begin to trade on their own a little bit, and gold will form some part of that. Obviously, because the BRICS currencies are 7 or 8 countries together, they will need some sort of central tenement to work against. And I believe that gold could be part of that because it has a centralized value for all the countries. So it might be a suite of these countries with gold backed around that. So I do believe that that is something that is very viable in the future, in the near future, as an alternative.
Yeah, and the evidence of that is, I guess, the central bank gold buying. I mean, if you don't know what's around the corner, you want to have the lifeboat handy, right? Which is the role that gold plays. You know, that's where you go when you don't know what's next. You take the asset, the only asset that is not somebody else's liability, and doesn't expose you to any counterparty risk, which is what you want in a moment of a crisis. But, you know, so sounds like we're all readers of Dalio. The ingredients that you need to see during the declining sunset years of an empire, there's 3 of them, right? You need the financial insolvency of the state. We can probably tick that box now. We need to borrow just to pay the interest on the money we borrowed. That's the debt spiral, and that tends to just go one direction. The second is the internal conflicts. People can no longer agree on anything. Small issues become big issues, and there's no more cultural alignment within the country. So you have massive disorder financially and culturally, but you can maintain that system of disorder for a long time until you need a third party to challenge the existing world order. You need somebody who's strong enough to raise a flag and say to the world, you know, world trade, say, look, we got a better way. Things aren't going so well with the old empire. We should do trade on our terms now. Now, maybe that's the challenge that the BRICS is presenting, but the BRICS has a lot of issues because they're ideologically different from each other. They're looking for alignment against the global superpower, but, you know, culturally, you know, politically, they're not aligned at all. And so do you see that challenge present? Maybe I'm misjudging the strength and alignment of the BRICS nations. Let me know if you think so, but do you see that external competitor present, and how would you identify and describe? Shane, I'll go to you.
Yeah, I would see it present. I would see it as not as strong like you a little bit, Jay. It's beginning to grow, but it's not there yet. There's, you know, but I believe it'll actually happen because of more of the demise of the US rather than the coming together of the others. You know, we're heading into a very volatile election period now in the US. We have 2, I would say, not great candidates for the US, and who knows what'll happen if one candidate doesn't agree with the others, or there's some issues around who voting or some challenges with voting. We had that in the last couple of elections, and you know that could go down could cause a lot of issues in the US. And all these kind of, in my opinion, people begin to lose faith in the US. You have the debt, you have poor leaders who are going ahead. If you remember in the book of the demise of the Roman Empire, it came down to empires, their generals or their leaders or their leader got worse and worse over time. You know, they began to start trusting, lack of trust in their own institutions, and that caused an internal conflict, which led other groups, allowed them into that realm. And I see that as more of a US demise, and allowing the other groups to come up. At this stage, US is very strong. It's a very powerful nation. But as it begins to unravel, the debt, political instability, I see that more opportunity for others to rise up. I don't know if we're there yet, but we will be fairly soon, I think, given the issue that was raised.
Bob, I want to go back to you and get back to the escalating global conflict. You painted a picture that put us pretty far on the brink. And I find myself wondering, like, how could I prove Bob wrong, or what could prove Bob wrong? The optimist in me, you know. And you mentioned, you know, France is escalating, the United States is escalating. We have a lot of consequential elections coming up, though, And Macron is now on the ropes. I don't know what's going to happen in the election, but Le Pen's looking really strong. Could a change of administration in France and in the US, we have an election coming up in the US, could a change of administration just allow the new leader the opportunity to reset policy? I mean, that's kind of what elections do. Politicians often are forced to stick to their guns and they don't want to pivot too much. But when you get a change of administration, you often get the opportunity to reset policy. And some of my guests recently have said the upcoming US election will probably end up being the most consequential geopolitical event of the year. So Bob, what's your take on what I just shared there?
That was complicated. Okay. There is no simple answer to that. Thanks very much, Jay. Let's talk about the election. First of all, the chance of Joe Biden being the candidate for the Democrats is zero.
You think
Zero.
so? Yeah,
Okay,
interesting.
zero.
Interesting.
There is no way Joe Biden, he might not even survive until the election. I find it very interesting because the Democrats are now saying Trump is a threat because if we elect him president, he's going to use the law to attack us. And I'm thinking, damn, isn't that exactly what they've been doing to him for years? Trump comes up for sentencing, I think 4 days before the Republican convention. And of course, one of the things the judge could do is put him in jail. My opinion, this is my opinion, it's not a fact. My opinion is the United States is far closer to a civil war than any of us realize. But you pointed something out that's very important. Now, you were talking about Macron, but frankly, the EU elections, the right moved significantly forward in every single one of them. I see the mainstream media, the political elite, the big money being on one side and the people being on the other side. Now, nobody wants a nuclear war who's on the people's side, but the oligarchs believe that there's something you can actually win. I am terrified because NATO is so aggressive towards Russia. Napoleon tried to attack Russia and he left with, I think, 9,000 out of 350,000. My numbers could be totally off. The French were massacred, okay, when they tried to attack Russia. And when Germany tried to attack Russia, exactly the same thing was true. Now, I do want to point one thing out, and I think this could be a game changer. If there was a currency that the BRICS agreed to use, that would be a game changer. Do you have any idea of what Napoleon did to settle the economy of France when he took control? The election, or the revolution started in 1789. It was a direct result of the French involvement in the American Revolutionary War. The Americans would have lost that war against Britain had France not gotten involved. However, France did get involved, but it bankrupted the king. People in Paris couldn't afford food. And this is what I see. This is why it's so scary. If the bond market blows up and inflation goes through the roof, people literally can't afford to buy food now. Okay. What's going to happen when it gets worse? Napoleon was a colonel. The French brought in 2 fiat currencies. They had the assignat, and that didn't work, and they printed them like crazy, and then they went to the mandat. And Napoleon was a colonel in the French army, and he took control in 1796, and he shot a lot of French people. Okay, he said, look, guys, we're going to get this under control. We're not going to have 15 people trying to run this shit. I'll kill you, okay, if you don't support me. And he did. Nobody talks about it, but tens of thousands of French died when Napoleon took control. And the very first thing that he did is to go back to real money. Quentin Henney and I were talking about this 15 or 20 years ago, and we designed a currency system around gold and silver. And instead of pricing gold in dollars or pounds or yen, price gold in grams.
Okay.
And if you did that, you would have a universal currency. Everybody's gram would be the same value, and it would require a shift in thinking. However, if the banks close, and there's a very real chance of that happening, people are going to want something. And strange enough, going to grams in the BRICS nations would be a good solution. Now, Russia owns a lot of gold and they produce a lot of gold, and China is buying gold like crazy. And we haven't talked about it, but the price of gold and the price of silver is now controlled by Shanghai. And that's a game changer. So lots of interesting things coming up. I think that if the BRICS went to gold as a currency denominated in grams, I think that would be a giant game changer.
Very interesting. Shane, I want to go to you right away here.
Yeah. And you know, we don't really need to talk about the future. As you know, Jay, today inflation is affecting a lot of people on the ground today. Never mind going forward. I mean, the US talks about an inflation rate of 4 to 5%. I mean, I'm on the ground trying to feed the family, and it's way more than 4 to 5%. So this is another extreme of, as Bob said, it's already starting. A lot of people today can't afford the foods and can't afford to live, and you know, the price of housing, the price of everything, it's getting out of control. And this is not even moving to the next stage, as Bob said, where it does get even crazy. So even today, there's a lot of concern in the world around the value of money and the value of the currency and the purchasing power, and that's already causing a lot of issues and control. As I said, I went to a bank recently to take out some money to buy a purchase, and you know, I had to fill out 20 forms to explain to the bank what I was doing with my own money. So you know, there is those controls already starting there. And so gold, as me and Bob have talked about, gold is that insurance policy. If something ever did happen catastrophic, then having gold is always a sort of a backup, and that's something that I believe in, and it's something that the rest of the world hasn't really started, but will do over time, I believe.
I'm with you. Yeah. And on that inflation front, I think between you and I, Shane, we have 7 kids. Inflation's front and center, man. I get it. And if we're feeling it, like, imagine. So walk me through, you know, we have a lot of new viewers coming onto the VRIC channel right now. And just a reminder for everybody who's tuned in, it's great to see you. This is This Week in Mining. We're live every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. So my guests are live right now. If you hit us up in the live chat, I'll get your question in front of our guests. Thanks for tuning in, though. Walk me through, you know, we have a lot of new viewers coming to the VRIC Media channel, Shane. And it's always curious to me when we see a surge of a new population subscribing that, you know, wasn't a subscriber last year. In a hot market, it makes a lot of sense, right? If companies are generating phenomenal returns, it attracts money like crazy, but it hasn't really been a hot market. Yet we've seen a surge of new subscribers on all of our channels and a surge of new attendees at our live conferences over the last 18 months. So people are turning their head to the conversation of money and asking the question, what is money? And that's driving them to the commodities business. So could either of you outline, you know, an intro to gold ownership strategy that if the intention is just to begin hedging and begin just as central banks are doing, they're starting to hedge their bets and they're creating optionality right outside of the traditional system. Either one of you want to take that?
Yeah,
Let me take that. What you just said is correct. You just got it reversed. Okay. People are not turning to alternative media. They're not turning to new investments. They're not turning to gold and silver. They're turning away from the mainstream media because they have woken up to the fact that they are being lied to about everything. Now, we were lied to about 9/11. We were lied to about the global financial crisis. We were lied to about COVID. We're lied to about Ukraine. We're lied to about Gaza. And you can lie to people for a long time, but sooner or later they wake up. And I will congratulate you, and I'll congratulate all of the voices in the alternative media. I'm not saying they're necessarily correct. However, they are alternative voices, and people are starting to pay attention. I mean, I will give you all the credit in the world for doing that. But quite bluntly, and Shane hit on something that's very important. Most of the people who talk to me about resource stocks as an investment and gold as an investment. And I think that's a giant mistake. Do you remember the word that Shane used to describe gold? Say what it is.
You're stumping me, Bob.
Oh, you got to listen carefully. He called that an insurance policy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gold is an insurance policy against chaos. I have people ask me all the time, okay, where's gold going to go? And my answer is always the same. I don't know. I don't have any clue. I mean, how could I say where gold is going to go? Because when you're talking about the price of gold, you're talking about two commodities. You're talking about gold, but you're talking about the US dollar at the same time. Gold is an insurance policy against chaos. And if you see chaos on the horizon, you have to go to a place of safety, and that's going to be gold and silver. And that's why I think a gold-based system based on grams, that's something every country should do. And the beauty about a hard currency is that it forces you to be conservative, and it forces you to only expand the money supply based on how much gold you've got. Now, I believe Russia understands that. I think they understand it better than anybody. And I think the Chinese understand that. We are going to go back to gold because there's no other possible alternative.
And I follow that up, Jay, a little bit, that unfortunately we're seen as the dismal investors, because people who, the goal isn't insurance, and for gold to rise and gold to get higher and higher and cause that certainty, the rest of the world has to go in a negative sense of the word, like with political instability, currency debasement. And so gold is we're gold investors, we love gold, but sometimes for us to be right, unfortunately, it has to be a very ugly place for everybody else. And that's the issue with gold. It is an insurance policy, and it'll get stronger as more of these conflicts happen, both on the monetary system and on politically.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. Actually, a viewer just made that exact comment. If gold rockets, it's going to mean the world is getting tough. Chaos isn't something you want to hope for, but if it happens, you want to be ready for it. Another question from the audience here. Back to the equities market. I just want to touch on this. Do either of you see any sparks, any specific events or red flags that would cause the equity market to begin selling off? Do you have any red flags in mind that you might be looking for? If someone's saying, what could trigger a sell-off in the equity market? Does anything come to mind? Either one of you?
Yes.
Bob, over to you.
Nvidia.
NVIDIA.
NVDA. Okay. It is going to crash. And the only question is, where does it crash come from? And this is going to sound stupid. I didn't realize there was no trading today in the United States. And I went to look for a quote, and it was showing me the price yesterday. The stock is at an all-time high. It's up like 35% in the last month. And that is totally insane. It is not based on real-world economics. All it would take is it to fall off its perch, and it will drag the rest of the market with it. It's going to happen but I don't know if it's going to happen this week or whether it's going to happen in 2 or 3 months, but it is going to happen.
And to follow up that a little bit, Jay, you know, it's gone crazy, the US stock market. You know, normal metrics or price to earnings ratios, et cetera, they seem to be gone out the window. Earnings across the main market are down significantly year on year, whereas we all focus on these 2 stocks, 3 stocks, or even 1 stock, as Bob said, that seem to be just driving the market crazy. And I've seen some statistics where the market cap of NVIDIA now is bigger than the GDP of some countries like Germany, etc. It's just crazy for the where you think it is. And I do believe at some stage the market will turn. And I believe once we start to get that sniff of a potential recession, Jay, later on, I believe this year, as you begin to get that and the interest rates begin to cut, I do believe that will send a bit of a signal for things to happen. And that's where the market will turn. And, you know, if the market turns away from those tech stocks, potentially it goes to safety, which is the gold market. And as you know, the gold market is tiny compared to the amount of money in the other markets. And that's like trying to put a huge amount of water through a funnel. That's where it gets a bit crazy and all the money comes back into the gold equities, you know.
Right. Okay. So great. Another question from the audience here. What about sentiment in the gold equities market? Everyone's talking about gold. Central banks are buying at record pace. The metal's hitting all-time highs, but the equities are pretty sleepy. I mean, Shane, you run a gold company. What's your take on investor sentiment in the gold equities market right now?
Yeah, and you are right, Jay. It is pretty poor at the moment. You know, if you're a producer today, Jay, you're in a great position. You know, producers are, and as we get the quarterly earnings now, the rest of this year and over, you will see record cash flows and record valuations, because if you're a producer, AICs are reasonably low and we're at an all-time high. So you're seeing huge cash flow as a producer. As you move down the market, you're not seeing that transfer of money down into the lower level. And normally what happens is it starts with the majors and the producers, and it takes some time to flow down to the developers and then down to the juniors. And that's a series of time events. And we're just beginning to see it come into the majors, I believe, now over the next 3 months. It'll just be a lag effect as it comes down into, it always happens that way. It always happens. It takes some time. But once it starts to do it, if you look at, I've seen some charts where you value the gold equities versus the S&P, et cetera, et cetera. It's just insane how lowly valued junior mining companies, gold equities are valued in historically. And in relation to the gold price today, you know.
And when that trickle down occurs, in my experience, when the market turns, it turns fast, right? And you want to be in position in advance of that. But you're right, that's exactly the sequence. We see the metal being bought, the producers being bought, maybe the big royalty companies, they're often the first to go. And then people go further down the risk ladder looking for the next to run, and eventually into the high leverage opportunities. Bob, you've been through, you know, more market cycles than I've been. What's your take on the sentiment in the gold equities market right now?
That's a good question. And Shane is exactly correct. And I actually posted a piece today about a company. I would highly encourage potential investors to take a look at the volume of trading of the juniors. And frankly, it sucks. But I don't look at that as a bad thing. I look at that as a good thing, okay? An avalanche starts at the very top of a mountain, okay? It doesn't start at the bottom. But rallies start at the bottom of a market, and it is such a dismal market that I think that sentiment is wonderful. Now, can we talk about West Red Lake for just a minute?
Take it away, man. Let's do it.
It's one of the 2 most undervalued stocks that I think exists in Canada. At one point, the predecessor company with only the Manston deposit had $1 billion market cap. At today's price, the company has $150 million market cap, $50 million in the bank. And before we started this, we were talking with Shane. They've got a mill that they talk about cost 350 million. And I said, okay, what would be the replacement cost today? And his answer was 600 million. Now, if you can buy $600 million in assets for $100 million, I'm sorry, that's a good deal. And then I did some more research into it, and I realized there are warrants that are trading now for 12 cents that are good for 2 years at $1. Now, they came out literally this week and said, we expect to go into production in the second half of 2025. So somewhere between 6 months and a year of production is going to happen before those warrants expire. Now, those warrants are at $1, okay? But the stock was over $1 2 months ago. Okay, so I think the warrants are exceptional, and I think the price of the stock is being driven down because real people realize their leverage on the warrants are just incredible. So I love West Red Lake, and I've said this publicly. I don't mind saying it publicly again. I think that Shane is one of the most competent managers I have ever seen. And I've been to somewhere between 400 and 500 projects, but I have owned West Red Lake before they did the deal. I would like to ask Shane one question, and that is, what do you see the contribution to the Rowan deposit to West Red Lake?
Yeah, before we jump into that a little bit, Bob, I would like to say that I do believe I look around, and that's not even you've talked about the value of the project. I would like to add to that we have some superstars on our board and our management team, which, as you know, Jay, it's always the people you back. It's not really the asset itself stands for itself, but we have some superstars who've been in the Canadian mine industry and done some big things. Between our backer, Frank Justra, our board, we have Tony McCooch, who built Kirkland, so all that package together, I'm biased, but I would agree with Bob. We are one of the best opportunities out there. But I see, we bought the Manson project, and we've talked about it, Jay. We called it the deal of the decade, I think, in one of our previous. We bought it for
century was the word. Yeah.
Was it century? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. We bought it for $6 million, but we have two deposits. We have the Rowan deposit as well, which is it's a part of the overall strategy to bring it together. So, we could be very quickly in a mid-tier producer range. And, you just have to look at sort of valuations, metrics of companies. We are, I believe, and I haven't paid Bob to say all that, which is, but I believe we're very undervalued for what we are. And it will only take time. People will start as we are moving close to production. And as we move closer, people will begin to get there. And now is the time to get in, for sure. Now is the time to get, and you're doing all that in a rising gold market. When the previous operator was trying to operate it, we had $1,300 gold. You're now looking at potentially next year, $2,500 gold. It's a different environment to be restarting a mine and ramping up a mine in those sort of environments. So that's sort of the picture and look, again, it was Frank Juster and myself. It's contrarian. That's why we went at that stage. You buy things when there's blood in the streets, as you would know, Jay, and that's where we did it,
Yeah. And, the previous operator was taking that project to production. It was being, I think accurately promoted as the next great Canadian gold story. And then a handful of major mistakes above the ground, right, caused the opposite to happen. But the rocks haven't changed. So new operators taking over. To follow up on Bob's question, Shane, can you talk a little bit about future news flow and what prospective investors can expect?
Yeah, look, we have we have 100 people on site, so we're ramping up really. We have 2 drills underground at the moment, Jay, and we are getting very impressive results. The market is not responding to them, as Bob will probably know, but we're getting some very, very high grade response in our drill results. So we're getting some fantastic results, and we will continue to do that. But we're also starting to move closer to production. So this, as you know, this golden runway we talk about, Jay, as we move towards closer to production, people will begin to see our de-risking events closer to production. We're buying equipment. We're getting ready to restart. We're starting underground mining. These are key catalysts that the investors can see that, oh, these guys are moving closer. And no, it's one thing for me to say we're getting close to production, but when you can see these milestones being ticked off, you know, that gives you a lot of confidence that we're doing what we said we would do. And I think they're going to be key catalysts for us. And layering on that, we'll have these exceptional drill results. So there's a lot of going on in the next 6 to 12 months for sure, Jay.
I love it. Look, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I want to thank you both for coming on. And Bob, as one of the most respected personalities in the sector, thank you so much for coming back on again. And Bob has called out West Red Lake as one of the 2 most undervalued Canadian gold stories in the business. And yourself, Shane, is one of the most competent operators, being the CEO of West Red Lake Gold. So I'm super honored to have you both join me today. We covered so much ground and it was super fun. First of all, thank you both for coming on and joining me. Second of all, thank you to everybody who showed up and tuned in today and hit the live chat. I see you there. I appreciate each and every one of you. This show is called This Week in Mining, and we are live every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific time, 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on the VRIC media channel, where we talk about making money in the mining and the metals market. Bob, Shane, thank you both so much.
Excellent.
Thank you, Jay.
It's been fun.
It's been fun. It's been fun. Okay. And to all of you in the audience, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week.